The wagon hit another rut, and Eliza Hart's head knocked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her teeth click. She didn't complain. Hadn't said a word for the last 40 miles, not since the driver had tried making conversation, and she'd answered in clipped syllables that killed his interest dead. The Kansas plains stretched in every direction like a punishment. November wind cut across the flatland, carrying the smell of coming snow and dried grass. No trees broke the horizon, no softness anywhere, just earth and sky and the brutal space between them. "Boone Ranch," the driver announced, pointing with his whip toward a cluster of buildings that looked more like an accident than a homestead. Eliza studied it through the dust. A main house, weathered gray. 2 barns listing slightly to the east. A bunkhouse with a chimney breathing thin smoke. Corrals with fence posts that needed replacing. Everything functional, nothing cared for. A place where people worked hard and felt nothing. "You sure about this, miss?" The driver glanced at her sidelong. "Caleb Boone ain't known for his hospitality. Goes through housekeepers like most men go through tobacco." "I'm sure. Suit yourself." He shrugged. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The wagon lurched to a stop in front of the house. Eliza climbed down before the driver could offer help, her boots hitting frozen ground with a solid thud. She wore a dark gray dress, practical and plain, with a wool coat that had seen better years. Her hair, nearly black, was pulled back severe enough to make her face look harder than it was. 28 years old, though the set of her jaw added a decade. She reached for her suitcase, battered leather, corners reinforced with metal, and the satchel she kept close. Books, mostly. The only things she'd carried from one life to the next. "Payment's been settled," the driver said, already turning the horses. "Good luck to you." He didn't wait for a response. The wagon rattled off, leaving Eliza alone in the yard with the wind and the silence and the sense that she'd reached the edge of the world. The front door opened. Caleb Boone stood in the frame, backlit by the dim interior. Tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders built from years of labor that didn't allow weakness. His face was all angles, sharp jaw, prominent cheekbones, eyes set deep enough that she couldn't read them from where she stood. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, though he couldn't have been much past 35. He wore work clothes, sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold, and he looked at her the way a man might assess a horse at auction. "You the one from the agency?" His voice matched the landscape, flat, hard, no warmth in it. "Eliza Hart, yes?" "You're late." The stage was delayed in Abilene, mechanical trouble. He grunted, which might have been acknowledgement or dismissal. Hard to tell. "You know what the work is?" "Cooking, cleaning, laundry, general household management. The letter specified room and board plus $18 a month." "That's right." He stepped aside, barely. "You got experience?" "I've kept house before." "Where?" Eliza met his eyes straight on. "Back east, Pennsylvania." "Why'd you leave?" "Same reason anyone leaves anywhere. Looking for something different." Caleb's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might press, might ask the questions she'd learned to deflect. But he just turned back into the house. "Come on then. Daylight's burning." The interior hit her like a slap. Not the cold, she'd expected that, but the absolute absence of care. The front room served as parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Ash spilled onto the hearth. The furniture was good quality once, probably, but now it sagged under layers of dust and neglect. Dishes sat stacked on a side table, some still crusted with old food. The smell was stale air and unwashed wool and something deeper, like rot. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb gestured toward a doorway. "Your room's upstairs, last door on the right. Bunkhouse feeds itself, but the hands come up for Sunday dinner. Water pumps out back. Privy's past the garden, what's left of it." Eliza set down her suitcase, looking around with an expression that gave nothing away. "How long since the last housekeeper left?" 3 months. "I see. You got a problem with the state of things?" "No." She unbuttoned her coat. "I've seen worse." That was a lie, but a useful one. Caleb watched her, arms crossed. "Rules are simple. I don't want conversation. I don't want questions about my business. You keep the house, cook decent food, stay out of the way. We'll get along fine." "Understood." "Hands know you're coming. They'll leave you alone, but you leave them alone too. No socializing. No..." He paused, searching for the word fraternizing. I'm here to work, Mr. Boone, not to make friends. Something flickered in his face. Approval, maybe, or relief. Good. You start tomorrow. Today you settle in. He left without another word, the back door slamming behind him. Eliza stood alone in the wreckage of the house and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Through the window, she could see Caleb crossing the yard toward the barns, his stride purposeful and solitary. A man who'd built walls so high, he'd forgotten what they were protecting. She recognized the type. Hell, she was the type. Rolling up her sleeves, Eliza began. Mom, the house fought her. 3 months of neglect had calcified into something almost solid. Grease coated the kitchen stove so thick she needed a knife to scrape it. The pantry was a disaster. Flour gone weevily, potatoes sprouted and soft, dried beans scattered across shelves like someone had thrown them. Most of it went straight to the slop bucket. She found a broom with half its bristles missing and swept anyway, working room by room, piling dirt and debris by the back door. The upstairs was worse. 4 bedrooms, only 1 in use. Caleb's, she assumed, door firmly shut. The others had become storage for things that should have been thrown out years ago. Broken furniture, CDs, stacks of newspapers from towns she'd never heard of. A child's cradle, shoved in a corner under old blankets. Eliza paused at that, fingers brushing the wood. Hand-carved quality work, unused for a long time. She didn't linger, didn't ask. Those were the rules. Her own room was small but functional. A narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for storage. The window looked east toward nothing but prairie. She unpacked quickly. 3 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, the satchel of books she placed on the windowsill where the light would hit them. Last came a small leather journal, which she tucked under the mattress. By evening, she'd made a dent. The kitchen was functional, at least. She'd found enough supplies to make a simple meal: salt pork, canned tomatoes, hardtack soaked and fried. Nothing fancy, but edible. Caleb came in after dark, stamping mud from his boots in the doorway. He looked surprised to find a plate waiting at the table, steam still rising. You didn't have to. It's my job. He sat slowly, like a man unused to being served. Ate in silence, fork scraping against the plate. Eliza busied herself at the sink, washing the pans she'd used, aware of his presence behind her but not acknowledging it. It's good, he said finally. The food. Thank you. Better than what I've been managing. She didn't ask what that had been. Didn't turn around. After a long pause, Caleb pushed back from the table. I'll be up before dawn. Don't worry about breakfast for me. Coffee's enough. I'll have it ready. He stopped at the doorway, one hand on the frame. Miss Hart? Yes? You really seen worse than this? Eliza kept her hands in the wash water, scrubbing at a stubborn spot. Yes, Mr. Boone. I really have. He left her to the silence and the dishes and the truth she'd just told. The ranch woke before the sun. Eliza heard it from her room, boots on wood, voices low and rough, the sound of men moving through cold dark toward another day of hard work. She was already dressed, hair pinned tight, making her way downstairs by lamplight. The coffee was boiling when Caleb appeared, dressed for riding, his face unreadable in the shadows. He poured himself a cup, drank it black and too hot, barely acknowledging her presence. I'll be in the north pasture most of the day, he said. Storm's coming tonight. We're moving cattle. I'll have supper ready. He nodded and left. Eliza watched through the window as he mounted a rangy sorrel horse and rode out with 3 other men, ranch hands presumably, though she hadn't been introduced. They moved like a unit, practiced and efficient, disappearing into the gray pre-dawn. She spent the morning finishing what she'd started. The front room began to look almost livable, floor scrubbed, furniture beaten free of dust, fireplace cleaned and laid with fresh wood. She found linens in a chest, moth-eaten but salvageable, and hung them to air. The work was methodical, mindless, the kind that let her thoughts drift while her hands stayed busy. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, aggressive and mean. Eliza checked the pantry supplies, mentally cataloging what she'd need from town. The list was long. Everything was running low or spoiled or simply gone. She was elbow-deep in sorting through a box of questionable preserves when she heard voices outside. Not the ranch hands returning, but something else. An argument, escalating. Through the kitchen's window, she could see two men by the corral. One was young, maybe 20, with sandy hair and a split lip that looked fresh. The other was older, thick through the chest and neck, his face red with anger. "I told you to fix that goddamn fence," the older one shouted. "I did fix it. Then why is it down again? You half-ass everything, boy. Everything." The young one stepped forward, fists clenched. "Don't call me boy, Garrett. I ain't your—" Garrett's backhand was fast and brutal. The kid went down hard, blood bright against the dust. Eliza was moving before she thought about it, out the back door, across the yard. "That's enough." Both men turned, surprised. "Who the hell are you?" Garrett demanded. "The housekeeper, and I asked you to stop." Garrett laughed, ugly and short. "This ain't your business, lady." "It is when it happens in my sight." She looked at the kid on the ground. "Get up." He struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth, eyes hot with shame. "Boy's got a lesson to learn," Garrett said, "about responsibility. Then teach it with words, not fists." "You got no idea how things work here." Eliza met his glare without flinching. "I know a bully when I see one, and I know Caleb Boone didn't hire me to watch grown men beat children." "He ain't a child, he's a goddamn useless—" "Enough!" The voice came from behind them, flat and final. Caleb stood near the barn, reins in one hand, his face carved from stone. The other ranch hands had gone quiet, watching. "Garrett," Caleb said, "get back to work." "Boss, I was just—" "Now!" Garrett's jaw worked, but he turned and stalked off, shoulders tight with anger. Caleb looked at the kid. "You all right, Tommy?" "Yes, sir." "Clean yourself up, then check those fences properly. Both of you missed something, or they wouldn't be down." "Yes, sir." Tommy left quickly, head down. That left Eliza and Caleb alone in the yard, the wind whipping dust between them. "I told you not to get involved with the hands," Caleb said quietly. "You told me not to fraternize." "I wasn't fraternizing. I was stopping an assault." "That's ranch business." "Not when it happens 10 feet from my kitchen." Caleb's eyes were cold. "You've been here one day, Miss Hart. One day. You don't know these men, don't know their history, don't know what I'm trying to build here." "I know what I saw." "Then you saw a man trying to teach a lesson to someone who needs teaching. Tommy's a good kid, but he's lazy, cuts corners. Garrett's hard on him because someone has to be. There's hard and there's cruel. That was cruel. This is a hard place." Caleb's voice dropped. "If you can't handle that, there's a stage back to Abilene on Friday." Eliza held his stare, something sharp and unyielding in her chest. "I can handle hard, Mr. Boone. I've handled worse, but I won't stand by and watch a man beat someone weaker just to feel strong. Not here, not anywhere." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind screamed across the plain, cold and merciless. Finally, Caleb looked away. "Storm's here. Get inside." He led his horse toward the barn without another word. Eliza walked back to the house, her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from something older and deeper. Anger, maybe. Or the memory of it. Inside, she braced her palms against the kitchen table and breathed until the shaking stopped. So, the storm hit like violence. Wind hammered the house, driving sleet against the windows in waves that sounded like gravel. The temperature dropped fast, turning the world outside into a gray blur. Eliza worked by lamplight, preparing supper for men who'd be coming in frozen and exhausted. She made stew, beef from the cold storage, potatoes, carrots, onions, everything thick and hot. Biscuits from scratch, heavy on the lard to keep them filling. Coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in. They came in just after dark, 4 of them including Caleb, looking like drowned ghosts. Ice crusted their hats and coats. Their faces were raw from wind, hands clumsy with cold. Garrett was first through the door. He saw Eliza at the stove and his expression went flat. "What's this?" "Supper," she said evenly. "Wash up. Table's set." "We eat in the bunkhouse." "Not tonight. Too cold. Sit." Garrett looked at Caleb, who was shrugging out of his coat. "Boss?" "You heard her," Caleb said. "Sit down." They sat awkwardly, like boys called to the principal's office. Tommy came in last, his lips still swollen, and took a seat as far from Garrett as possible. Eliza served without ceremony, ladling stew into bowls, setting out biscuits, pouring coffee. The men ate in silence, too hungry or too tired to talk. She took her own meal standing at the counter, watching the storm through the window. "This is good," one of the hands said quietly, a thin man with gray stubble and kind eyes. "Real good, ma'am." "Thank you." "Better than anything we've had in ages," Tommy added, avoiding Garrett's glare. "Don't get used to it," Garrett muttered. Eliza turned from the window. "Why not?" "Because housekeepers don't last here. You'll be gone inside a month." "Maybe." "No, maybe about it. They all leave. Can't handle the isolation, the work, the—" He gestured vaguely. "The way things are. Then I guess we'll see, won't we?" Caleb's spoon clinked against his bowl. "Garrett, enough. Just stating facts, boss. State them somewhere else." The room went quiet except for the storm. Eliza refilled coffee cups, moving around the table with practiced efficiency. When she reached Caleb, their eyes met briefly, his unreadable, hers steady. After the meal, the hands excused themselves quickly, filing out into the storm toward the bunkhouse. All except Caleb, who lingered by the fire, staring into the flames. Eliza cleared the table, scraped plates, began washing up. "You didn't have to do this," Caleb said without turning. "Yes, I did. The bunkhouse has a stove. Not like this one. And those men needed a real meal. They're used to hard living. That doesn't mean they should settle for it." Caleb turned then, studying her in the firelight. "You're different from the others." "The other housekeepers?" "Yeah." "How so?" He seemed to consider. "You don't flinch." Eliza dried a plate slowly. "Flinching doesn't help anything. Most people flinch when Garrett raises his voice. You walk straight at him." "Most people aren't me." "No," Caleb said quietly. "I'm starting to see that." He left her to finish the dishes, climbing the stairs to his room without good night. Eliza worked until everything was clean and put away, until the fire burned low and the storm still raged outside. Then she climbed to her own small room, lit a single candle, and pulled the journal from under her mattress. The first page was dated 3 years ago. The handwriting was hers, but shakier, written in a different life. "They're saying I did it, saying I set the fire. Mrs. Coleman saw me near the school that night, and that's enough for them. I tried to explain, tried to tell them I was trying to help, that I smelled smoke and ran toward it, not away. But nobody believes me. Why would they? I'm nobody, just a teacher, just a woman who should have known her place." Eliza closed the journal without reading further. She knew what came next, the accusations, the trial that never happened because she ran. The years of moving from town to town under different names, always one step ahead of a warrant she wasn't sure still existed. 3 years of running, 3 years of looking over her shoulder, and now, here, at the edge of the world where nobody asked questions, she'd found something like shelter. But shelter was temporary. It always was. She blew out the candle and lay in the dark, listening to the storm and wondering how long she had before the past caught up again. The weeks that followed fell into rhythm. Eliza rose before dawn, started the coffee, prepared simple breakfasts that Caleb took without comment. She worked through the days systematically, cleaning what could be cleaned, discarding what couldn't, slowly bringing order to chaos. The house began to breathe differently. Windows that had been painted shut creaked open. Curtains she'd found in storage, washed and mended, filtered weak winter light into rooms that had been dark for too long. Caleb noticed but said nothing. He was a man of few words, she learned, who communicated through gestures and silences. A nod meant approval. A grunt meant he'd heard her. Actual sentences were reserved for necessary information, cattle counts, weather predictions, supply needs. She learned his patterns. Up before sunrise, out until dusk. He took his coffee black and his whiskey straight, 1 glass before bed, never more. He slept lightly. She heard him moving at odd hours, pacing, restless. Some nights he didn't sleep at all, and she'd find him at dawn, staring out the front window at nothing. The hands kept their distance mostly, except for the kind-eyed one named Jessie, who helped her haul water without being asked, and Tommy, who started lingering after meals with questions that weren't really about the questions. "Miss Hart, you think a man can change? Like, really change?" She was scrubbing a pot, and she paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering. Everyone says people are what they are. that you can't fight your nature. People say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. But do you think it? Eliza looked at him, this kid with bruises fading on his face and something desperate in his eyes. I think change is hard. I think most people don't manage it, but I think it's possible if you want it bad enough and you're willing to pay the price. What's the price? Everything you were before. Tommy thought about that, nodding slowly. That seems fair. He started coming around more after that. Small things, offering to chop firewood, fix a loose board on the porch, carry heavy loads. Eliza didn't discourage him, despite Caleb's rules. The kid needed something to care about, and if that was making himself useful, she'd let him. One afternoon, she found him in the barn, struggling to read a feed sack label. "It's oats," she said from the doorway. Tommy jumped, dropping the sack. I was just, it's all right. I ain't good with letters. Never learned proper." Eliza stepped closer. "You want to?" "Want to what?" "Learn proper." His face went through several emotions: hope, suspicion, embarrassment. "You'd teach me?" "If you're willing to work at it." "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone should know how to read, Tommy. It's not charity, it's basic decency. Garrett says reading's for rich folks and city people. Says a ranch hand don't need it. Garrett's wrong about a lot of things." Tommy grinned, quick and bright. "Yes, ma'am, he is." They started that evening after supper when the other hands were playing cards in the bunkhouse. Eliza brought out one of her books, a primer, simple and clear, and they sat at the kitchen table by lamplight. "What's this word?" She pointed. "I don't..." "Sound it out, like I showed you." "See... cat?" "Close. The A here makes an A sound. Cake." "Cake." Tommy's whole face lit up. "I got it! Cake!" "Good. Now this one." They worked for an hour before his eyes started crossing from concentration. Eliza sent him off with instructions to practice the alphabet she'd written out for him. "Miss Hart?" he said at the door. "Thank you. Come back tomorrow night. We'll keep going." After he left, she heard a sound from the hallway. Caleb stood in shadow, arms crossed. "How long you been there?" she asked. "Long enough." He stepped into the light. "I told you not to get involved with the hands. You told me not to fraternize. This is education. It's the same thing. It's not even close to the same thing." Caleb's jaw tightened. That boy's got work to do. Can't have him distracted. Reading for an hour won't hurt his work. Might even help it. "You don't know that." "I do, actually. I've seen it." "Where? Back east in Pennsylvania?" There was something sharp in his voice now, almost accusatory. "You were a teacher?" Eliza went still. "I kept house. I told you that. Housekeepers don't usually carry satchels full of books." "Maybe I like to read." "Maybe." Caleb moved closer, studying her in the lamplight. "Or maybe you're running from something. Maybe that's why you came all the way out here, to the middle of nowhere, taking a job that most women wouldn't touch." "Everyone's running from something, Mr. Boone." "What are you running from?" The question hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Eliza met his eyes straight on. "The same thing you are. A past that won't stay buried." Caleb flinched, actually flinched, like she'd struck him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The lamp flickered. Wind rattled the windows. Finally, Caleb stepped back. "Keep teaching him if you want, but keep it quiet. Garrett finds out, there'll be trouble." "Understood." He left without another word. But Eliza heard him pause on the stairs, heard the long exhale that sounded like surrender or exhaustion or both. She sat alone at the table, staring at the primer, wondering what she'd just revealed and what it would cost her. Tommy wasn't the only one. Jesse came next, hat in hand, asking if maybe he could join the lessons. Then a hand named Miguel, who spoke 3 languages but couldn't read in any of them. Within 2 weeks, Eliza had 4 students gathering after supper, crowded around the kitchen table, laboriously working through letters and sounds. They were grown men, most of them, with weathered faces and calloused hands, and they bent over their slates like children, determined and earnest. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Caleb stayed away, but she knew he was watching, knew he heard the stumbling recitations, the small celebrations when someone finally sounded out a whole sentence. He never commented, but she noticed things. Fresh lamp oil appearing on the shelf, extra candles, a worn dictionary left casually on the kitchen counter. December came, bringing snow and bitter cold. The ranch slowed its rhythm, men spending more time on repairs and maintenance, less time in the brutal outdoors. The evening lessons expanded. Eliza found herself teaching basic arithmetic, writing, even a little geography. "Where's France?" Miguel asked one night, peering at a map she'd drawn. "Across the ocean. Here." She pointed. "You ever been?" "No. But you know about it." "From books." Tommy looked up from his slate. "Books can take you anywhere, can't they, Miss Hart?" "Anywhere you want to go." "I want to go everywhere," he said, and there was such longing in his voice that Eliza's chest ached. "Then keep reading. It's the best way to start." Garrett caught them one night, coming in early from the bunkhouse. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, 4 grown men hunched over books like schoolboys, Eliza moving between them with quiet corrections. "What the hell is this?" The room went silent. "Evening lessons," Eliza said calmly. "Lessons." Garrett's lip curled. "You turning my crew into a bunch of soft-handed scholars?" "I'm teaching them to read." "They don't need to read. They need to work." "They can do both." "Like hell they can." Garrett pointed at Tommy. "You. Get back to the bunkhouse." Tommy looked at Eliza, uncertain. "Stay," she said quietly. "That wasn't a request, boy, and neither was mine." Eliza stood, placing herself between Garrett and her students. "These men come here on their own time. They're not children. They can make their own choices." "Not on this ranch they can't. Boone don't pay them to sit around playing schoolhouse." "Actually," Caleb's voice came from the stairs, "I don't pay them for their evenings at all. What they do with that time is their business." Garrett spun. "Boss, you're going to allow this? This woman's filling their heads with nonsense, making them think they're something they ain't." "What are they, Garrett?" Caleb descended slowly, his face carved granite. "Tell me, what are these men that reading would make them think different?" Garrett's mouth worked. "That's not... I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. That they should know their place. Stay in it. Never reach for anything better." Caleb stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "Is that about right?" "I meant they got work to do." "They do their work. Every damn day, in weather that would kill most men. What Miss Hart's teaching them doesn't change that. Might even make them better at it." "You really believe that? Reading's going to make Tommy fix fences better?" "I believe," Caleb said carefully, "that a man who can read can learn, can think, can improve himself. I believe that's worth something." Garrett stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Since when do you care about improvement?" The question landed hard. Caleb's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or old anger. "Get out," he said quietly. "Boss, out, now!" Garrett left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The kitchen sat in stunned silence. "Well," Jesse said finally, "that was something." Caleb looked at the men gathered around the table, his men, hardworking and loyal, now staring at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. "Any of you have a problem with this? With learning?" They shook their heads, quick and certain. "Good. Then get back to it. And don't let Garrett intimidate you. He's a good foreman, but he doesn't run your lives." "Thank you, boss," Tommy said, voice thick. Caleb just nodded and turned toward his room. At the stairs he paused, looking back at Eliza. "Keep teaching them, but maybe I could sit in sometime if you don't mind." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and warm. "I don't mind." "Good." He climbed the stairs quickly, before anyone could see his face. The lessons continued, and 3 nights later Caleb joined them. He sat at the end of the table, quiet and awkward, working through the same primer as Tommy. His handwriting was cramped and unpracticed, but he stuck with it, determined. "This word?" he asked Eliza, pointing. "Horizon." "Horizon," he repeated, tracing the letters. "What's it mean?" "The line where earth meets sky. The edge of what you can see." Caleb stared at the word for a long moment. "The edge of what you can see," he said softly. "Yeah, I like that." Eliza watched him bent over the page, this hard man trying to learn something new, and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. This was dangerous. This, whatever was building here, was exactly what she couldn't afford. But she didn't stop it. She should have. Christmas came to the ranch like an afterthought. Eliza marked it by making a proper meal: roasted chicken, potatoes with gravy, dried apple pie. The hands ate with the reverence usually reserved for church, and someone produced a harmonica, filling the house with music that sounded almost like hope. Caleb gave each man a small bonus in their pay. To Eliza, he gave something else: a book, leather-bound and beautiful, its pages still crisp. Poetry, he said, awkward and gruff. Saw it in town. Thought you might. I don't know. Thought you'd like it. Eliza turned it over in her hands, throat tight. It's beautiful. Thank you. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Their eyes met, and the room seemed to shrink around them, all warmth and lamplight and possibility. Well, Caleb said, clearing his throat. Merry Christmas, Miss Hart. Merry Christmas, Mr. Boone. That night, alone in her room, Eliza opened the journal she'd been avoiding. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago, before Tommy's first lesson. She wrote now, her hand steady. I am breaking the rules I set for myself, getting involved, getting attached. I can feel it happening, and I don't know how to stop. Maybe I don't want to. Caleb Boone is not a good man, not in the simple way. He's hard and broken, and sometimes cruel in the way men are when they've been hurt too deeply. But he's trying. I see him trying, and the men, Tommy and Jesse and Miguel and the others, they're changing, growing, becoming more than what they thought possible. And me? What am I becoming? I don't know. But for the first time in 3 years, I'm not running. I'm standing still, building something. It terrifies me. She closed the journal and looked out at the winter darkness, at the stars burning cold and distant, and wondered how long she could hold this fragile thing before it shattered. The answer came sooner than she expected. January arrived with the kind of cold that made your bones ache, the kind that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground and made breathing feel like swallowing knives. Snow piled against the buildings in drifts that reached the windows, and the wind never stopped, just changed direction, finding new ways to cut through clothing and walls and skin. The ranch pulled inward, men and animals huddling close to whatever warmth they could find. The evening lessons continued, the kitchen becoming a refuge where the fire burned hot and words on pages offered escape from the frozen world outside. Eliza had 7 students now. Even a couple of men from neighboring ranches had started showing up, drawn by rumors of the woman who taught reading without judgment or cost. She didn't ask questions, didn't require explanations, just opened her books and her kitchen and let them come. Caleb watched it all with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sometimes he joined the lessons, working through his own reading with the same stubborn determination he applied to everything else. Other times he sat by the fire, whittling or pretending to read the newspaper while listening to the stumbling recitations and quiet corrections. Something was shifting between them. Small things, barely noticeable except that Eliza noticed everything. The way Caleb's eyes lingered when she moved across the room. How he'd started taking his coffee at the kitchen table instead of standing by the door. The nights he came down from his room, restless and sleepless, finding her still awake with a book, and they'd sit in silence that felt less empty than it should. They didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge it, but it was there, growing in the spaces between words. It was Jesse who broke the careful peace. Miss Hart, he said one evening after lessons, when the others had filed out into the snow. Can I ask you something? Of course. He twisted his hat in his hands, weathered face uncertain. You ever teach children, like in a real school? Eliza went very still. Why do you ask? Just the way you do things, the way you explain. My sister was a school teacher back in Ohio, and you remind me of her. Got that same patience, like you done this before. I've done a lot of things before, Jesse. That ain't an answer. No, she said quietly. It's not. Jesse studied her, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Ain't my business anyway. Just wanted to say, whatever you were before you came here, you're good at this, real good. And it matters to us, all of us. He left before she could respond, taking his kindness with him into the cold. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, Jesse's question echoing in her head. The walls she'd built so carefully were wearing thin. People were starting to ask, starting to wonder. It was only a matter of time before someone asked the right question, the one she couldn't deflect. She found Caleb in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Something wrong? No, just needed air. He went back to examining the mare, running his hands along her swollen belly with surprising gentleness. She'll drop soon. Maybe tonight. Eliza leaned against a stall door, watching him work. You're good with them, the horses. They're honest, do what they're built to do, no pretense. Unlike people. Unlike people, he agreed. Silence settled between them, broken only by the mare's soft breathing and the wind battering the barn walls. Caleb, Eliza said, and his name felt strange in her mouth, intimate, dangerous. She'd called him Mr. Boone for months, keeping that formal distance. Can I ask you something? He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. Go ahead. Why did you let me start teaching? Really? It goes against everything you said when I first got here. No involvement, no fraternizing. Stay out of the way. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed in the dim lamplight. You want the truth? Always. Because I was tired. He said it simply, like admitting to a minor fault. Tired of running this place like a prison camp. Tired of seeing good men stay ignorant because I was too afraid to let anything change. Tired of being the kind of man who'd rather keep everyone at arm's length than risk what? Caring. The word came out rough. Caring what happens, who they become, whether they're happy or just surviving. Eliza felt her throat tighten. What changed? You did. He looked at her straight on. You walked into my house and didn't flinch. Didn't run when Garrett was an ass or when I was cold or when everything was falling apart. You just fixed it. Fixed things I didn't even know were broken. I'm just a housekeeper. You're a liar. He said it without malice, almost gentle. Whatever you are, whoever you were before you came here, you're no more just a housekeeper than I'm just a rancher. Caleb, I'm not asking. He held up a hand. I'm not stupid enough to think you'll tell me. Everyone's got secrets. I got mine, you got yours. But I want you to know, whatever you're running from, whoever might be looking for you, you're safe here. Far as I'm concerned, Eliza Hart showed up on my doorstep 3 months ago, and that's the whole story. Something in Eliza's chest cracked open. Why would you do that? You don't know what I might have done, don't I? Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. I know you teach reading to ranch hands who society says don't deserve it. I know you stepped between Garrett and Tommy without hesitation. I know you work harder than any woman I've ever met and ask for nothing in return. I know when you smile, really smile, not that polite thing you do, your whole face changes. That doesn't mean it means enough. His voice dropped. Whatever you did or didn't do, whoever might be hunting you, I don't care. This ranch needs you. Those men need you. And you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yeah, me too. The barn felt too small suddenly, the air too warm despite the cold pressing in from outside. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent. I should go, she managed. Check on supper. Eliza. She stopped at the door, not turning around. Whatever happens, Caleb said quietly. I meant what I said. You're safe here. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled into the snow. That night she wrote in her journal with shaking hands. He knows. Not the details, but he knows I'm hiding something, and he doesn't care, or says he doesn't, which might be worse. Because now I want to tell him, want to confess everything, the fire, the accusations, the running. Want to unburden myself to someone who might understand, but I can't. Because the moment I tell him the truth, he'll have to make a choice, believe me or believe the law, and I can't ask that of him, won't. So I'll keep lying, keep pretending, keep being Eliza Hart, housekeeper, and bury the woman I was before, even if it kills me. She closed the journal and stared at the darkness pressing against her window, wondering if safety was just another word for a prettier prison. The mare foaled 2 days later, a healthy filly that stood on wobbling legs and nursed like she'd been doing it forever. Tommy was ecstatic, volunteering to handle all the extra work that came with a newborn. He spent every spare moment in the barn, talking to the filly like she understood every word. "What are you going to call her?" Eliza asked, finding him there one afternoon. "Ain't my horse to name. I think Mr. Boone would let you." Tommy's face lit up, then clouded. "I ain't good with names." "What does she remind you of?" He studied the filly, all legs and curiosity, with a white blaze down her face. "Hope," he said finally. "She reminds me of hope, like things can start fresh, be born into something better." Eliza felt her eyes sting. "Then call her that. Hope." "You think that's stupid?" "I think it's perfect." Tommy grinned, that open, unguarded expression he got sometimes when he forgot to be tough. "Miss Hart, I've been meaning to tell you something." "What's that?" "When I first came to this ranch, I couldn't even write my own name. Used to sign my pay with an X like I was too dumb to matter. But now—" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, smoothed it out carefully. "I wrote this, all by myself." It was a letter, the handwriting uneven but legible, addressed to his mother back in Missouri. Eliza read it quickly, simple sentences about his work, his life, his learning. At the bottom he'd signed, "Your son, Thomas William Cooper." "Tommy, this is wonderful." "You really think so?" "I know so. Your mother will be proud." I never told her about the reading before. Was too ashamed, I guess. But now I ain't ashamed no more. He took the letter back, folding it with care. "That's because of you. You gave me that." "You gave it to yourself. I just showed you how." "Same thing, ain't it?" Maybe it was. Eliza wasn't sure anymore where teaching ended and transformation began, but watching Tommy carefully tuck that letter into his shirt pocket, she felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. This was why she'd become a teacher in the first place, before everything went wrong. This moment when a person discovered they were more than they'd been told, more than they'd believed. It was worth every risk. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it made her afraid. February brought a thaw, the kind that turned everything to mud and made travel treacherous. The stage from Abilene arrived late, stuck twice in roads that had become rivers of freezing slush. It brought supplies, mail, and something else. A stranger. Eliza was hanging wash when she saw him. A man in a dark suit, clean despite the mud, with the kind of face that belonged in cities and courtrooms. He stood in the yard talking to Caleb, gesturing with a leather portfolio. Her hands went still on the clothesline. Through the window, she watched them. Caleb's body language was stiff, resistant. The stranger kept talking, opening the portfolio, showing papers. Caleb shook his head. The stranger pressed harder. Finally, Caleb pointed toward the house, toward her. Eliza's heart stopped. She forced herself to keep working, to pin up sheets with hands that wanted to shake. The back door opened, boots on the floor, 2 sets. "Miss Hart," Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "Got someone here to meet you." She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. The stranger stood in her kitchen, studying her with eyes that cataloged everything, her face, her posture, the books on the shelf behind her. "Ma'am," he tipped his hat. "Name's Robert Fletcher. I'm a federal marshal out of Kansas City." The world tilted. Eliza gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Marshal," she managed, "what brings you all the way out here?" "I'm looking for someone." He pulled a photograph from his portfolio, held it up. A woman's face, younger, hairstyled differently, but unmistakably the same. Her name's Elizabeth Hartwell, last seen in Pennsylvania 3 years ago. She's wanted for questioning in connection with a fire at the Riverside School for Girls. 7 children died. Eliza heard the words from a great distance, like she was underwater. "That's terrible," she heard herself say, "but I don't see what it has to do with me." Fletcher's smile was thin. "You bear a striking resemblance to Miss Hartwell. Lots of women have dark hair." "True enough, but not many carry the same books she was known to favor." He gestured to the shelf. "That's a first edition of Emerson's essays right there. Quite rare. Riverside School had one in their library. It went missing after the fire." Caleb stepped forward. "You're accusing my housekeeper of theft based on a book?" "I'm not accusing anyone yet. Just making observations." "Then observe this. Miss Hart's been working here since November. Hasn't caused any trouble, hasn't broken any laws. You want to harass her based on her looks and her reading material? You'll need more than that. Fletcher's eyes sharpened. Mr. Boone, I understand you're protective of your employee, but obstruction of justice is a serious charge. So is harassment. Gentlemen, Eliza's voice cut through, steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. There's no need for this. Marshal Fletcher, you're welcome to ask me whatever questions you have. I've got nothing to hide. It was a lie so bold it burned her tongue. Fletcher pulled out a chair, sat without being invited. Then let's start simple. Where were you 3 years ago this month? Working. Different household, different state. Which state? Missouri, outside of St. Louis. Name of the family? She gave him one. A real family she'd worked for briefly years ago, before everything. Fletcher wrote it down. And before that? Illinois, Indiana. I've moved around quite a bit. Looking for work? Looking for the right situation. Or running from the wrong one? Caleb's hand came down on the table, hard. Enough. Fletcher didn't flinch. Mr. Boone, I appreciate your hospitality, but this is official business. If Miss Hart has nothing to hide, she'll cooperate fully. She's been cooperating. You're fishing. Maybe, but here's what I know. Fletcher leaned back, fingers steepled. Elizabeth Hartwell was a teacher, well-educated, passionate about literacy. She ran night classes for working women, taught on her own time without pay. Sound familiar? Eliza's blood turned to ice. Lots of teachers do that, Caleb said. Indeed. But Miss Hartwell was also present the night Riverside School burned. Multiple witnesses placed her near the building. She fled before authorities could question her properly. 3 years of silence, 3 years of hiding. Fletcher's eyes locked on Eliza. That's not the behavior of an innocent woman. That's not the behavior of a guilty one either. Eliza kept her voice level. It's the behavior of someone who knows how the world works. A woman alone, accused without evidence, facing a town that's already decided she's guilty? Running isn't cowardice, Marshal. It's survival. So you admit you're her? I admit nothing. I'm saying I understand why she ran, if she did what you claim. The running makes her look guilty. The running keeps her alive. Fletcher studied her for a long moment. You're very articulate for a housekeeper. You're very presumptuous for a lawman without a warrant. His smile was cold. I can get one. Then get one. Until then, I've got work to do. She turned back to the wash basin, hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the bar of soap. Behind her, she heard Fletcher stand. I'll be in town for a few days, he said, conducting interviews, gathering information. If you think of anything that might help my investigation, Miss Hart, I'd appreciate you letting me know. I'll keep that in mind. He left, boots echoing across the floor. The door closed. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Caleb moved first, crossing to where she stood frozen at the sink. Eliza. Don't. She couldn't look at him. Please don't. He's fishing. You said it yourself. He knows. Maybe he can't prove it yet, but he knows. Knowing and proving are different things. Not different enough. She finally turned to face him, and something in her must have shown because his expression went soft, almost wounded. I should leave. Tonight. Before this gets worse. No. Caleb, I can't stay here. I won't bring that down on you, on this ranch. I said no. His voice was iron. You run now. It proves everything he suspects. You stay, keep doing what you've been doing, and we fight this together. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it to me. Eliza closed her eyes. There was a fire. He's right about that. At a school where I taught. 7 girls died. She heard Caleb's sharp intake of breath but forced herself to continue. I didn't start it. I swear on everything I am, I didn't. But I was there. I smelled smoke and I ran toward it, trying to help. By the time I got inside, the whole second floor was burning. I got 3 girls out before the stairs collapsed. 3 out of 7. Eliza. The town needed someone to blame. The school was funded by wealthy families, and when their daughters died, they wanted blood. I was convenient. A woman. No family, no connections. The perfect scapegoat. Her voice cracked. So I ran. Been running ever since. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he'd leave. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, rough palm against rough palm, both of them marked by work and survival. "Those 3 girls you saved," he said quietly. "They still alive?" "I don't know. I never looked back." "You should have, because they'd tell anyone who asks that you're a hero, not a criminal. The law doesn't care about heroes, just guilt and innocence." "Then we prove you're innocent." "How? I have no evidence, no witnesses who'd speak for me, just my word against the town's need for justice." Caleb's grip tightened. "You got more than that now. You got me. You got Jesse and Tommy and Miguel. You got every man on this ranch who knows what kind of person you are." "That won't be enough." "Maybe not, but it's a start." He pulled her closer, close enough that she could see the determination in his eyes. "I'm not letting you run. Not again. We fight this. Together." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because you did the same for Tommy. For all of them. Because you walked into my house and made it a home again. Because—" He stopped, jaw working. "Because I can't lose you. Not to Fletcher, not to fear, not to the past. I can't." Eliza felt tears she'd held back for 3 years finally break free. "I'm so tired of running." "Then stop. Stay. Let me help you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that staying was possible, that fighting was worth it, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it real. Still. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Caleb pulled her into an embrace that felt like shelter and salvation, and maybe the biggest mistake she'd ever make. But she let herself have it anyway, just for a moment, before the world came crashing down. 3 days later, Fletcher returned with a warrant for her arrest. He arrived at dawn with 2 deputies, faces grim and official. Eliza was making coffee when they knocked. Through the window, she saw them, and everything inside her went cold and clear. She opened the door before they could knock again. "Marshal Fletcher, Miss Hart, or should I say Miss Hartwell?" He held up the paper. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of arson and involuntary manslaughter. You'll need to come with me." "On what evidence?" "Witness testimony, physical evidence, enough for a judge to sign this." He stepped forward. "You can come peacefully, or we can make this difficult." "She's going nowhere." Caleb emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held low. Behind him, Jesse, Tommy, Miguel, and 6 other men spread out across the yard. Fletcher's hand went to his gun. "Mr. Boone, don't make this worse. You're arresting an innocent woman based on lies and circumstance. How could it get worse?" "That's for a court to decide." "Your court's already decided 3 years ago. That's why she ran." "Then she should have stayed and fought." "Against what?" Eliza stepped forward, placing herself between Caleb and the lawmen. "Against money and influence and a town that needed blood?" "I was a teacher, Marshal. A woman alone. I had no chance." "You have a chance now. A fair trial. There's no such thing as a fair trial when the verdict's already written." She looked at Caleb, at his fierce protective fury, and felt her heart break clean in half. "But I'll go anyway. Because fighting you will only make it worse for everyone here." "Eliza, no." "Yes." She met his eyes. "I won't let you throw away everything you've built for me. I won't. You think I care about— I know you care. That's why I'm going." She turned to Fletcher. "I'll need a moment to gather my things." Fletcher nodded, wary. 5 minutes. Eliza walked back into the house on legs that felt borrowed, climbed the stairs one last time to her small room. She packed quickly. A change of clothes, her journal, the book Caleb had given her for Christmas. At the last moment, she grabbed a pen and paper and wrote quickly, "I'm sorry for lying, for putting you at risk, for making you care. But I'm not sorry for knowing you. That at least was real. E." She left the note on her pillow and went downstairs. Caleb stood in the kitchen, face like stone. "Don't do this." "I have to." "You don't. We can fight. We can—" "Caleb." She touched his face, gentle and final. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a home, for believing in me, for—" Her voice broke. "For making me hope again." She kissed him then, quick and desperate, tasting salt and regret. Then she walked out into the cold morning and let Marshal Fletcher put chains on her wrists. As they rode away, she looked back once. Caleb stood in the yard, surrounded by the men she'd taught, watching her disappear. And for the first time in 3 years, Eliza Hart stopped running. The jail in Abilene was a brick box with iron bars and the smell of despair baked into the walls. Eliza's cell was 6 feet by 8, with a cot that sagged in the middle and a bucket in the corner that served purposes she tried not to think about. A single window, too high to reach, let in a square of pale light that moved across the floor as the hours dragged past. She'd been there 4 days. Fletcher had processed her arrest with professional efficiency. Fingerprints, photographs, a list of charges read in a monotone that made them sound almost boring. Arson, 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter, flight to avoid prosecution. He'd offered her a chance to confess, to make things easier on herself. She'd refused. Now she sat on the cot, knees pulled to her chest, listening to the sounds of the jail. Drunk cowboys sleeping it off in adjacent cells. The deputy's boots on the wooden floor. Somewhere outside, a dog barking at nothing. She'd expected fear. Expected the kind of paralyzing terror that had sent her running 3 years ago. Instead, she felt something closer to numbness. Or maybe clarity. She'd been running so long that stopping, even like this, felt almost like relief. The door at the end of the corridor clanged open. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Eliza didn't look up. "You have a visitor," the deputy said. "I don't want visitors." "Wasn't asking what you want." She raised her head. Caleb stood outside the cell, hat in his hands, his face drawn and tired. He looked like he hadn't slept since she'd left. 5 minutes, the deputy said, unlocking the cell door. "I'll be right outside." Caleb stepped inside. The door clanged shut behind him, making Eliza flinch despite herself. They stared at each other across the small space. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "Probably not. If Fletcher sees you, I don't care what Fletcher sees." Caleb sat on the cot beside her, keeping a careful distance but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "How are you holding up?" "I'm in jail awaiting trial for murder. How do you think I'm holding up?" "Fair point." Silence settled between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "I read your note," Caleb said quietly. "The apology. The part about not being sorry for knowing me. I meant it." "I know. That's what made me so angry." He turned to face her. "You think I want an apology? You think I care that you lied about your name, your past? Hell, Eliza, I knew you were lying from the first week, knew you were running from something. Then why? Because it didn't matter. Whatever you'd done, whoever you'd been, it didn't change who you are now. Didn't change that you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. To me, in years." Eliza felt her throat close. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you teach reading to men's societies written off. I know you stand up to bullies twice your size. I know you cry when you think no one's watching, and you haven't had a decent night's sleep since you got here because you're too busy worrying about everyone else. That doesn't make me innocent. No, but it makes you worth fighting for." Caleb leaned closer. "I'm not letting you go down for this. Not without a fight. There's nothing to fight. They have witnesses. They have evidence. They have 3 years of me running, which looks like guilt no matter how you spin it. Then we find the truth. Find out who really started that fire. I've had 3 years to think about it, Caleb. If I knew who did it, I would have said something. Maybe you weren't asking the right questions. And you think you can? A rancher from Kansas who's never set foot in Pennsylvania? No, Caleb said. But I know someone who might help. A lawyer in Kansas City. A good one, too. Defended my father once, years back, when there was trouble over water rights. He owes me a favor. I can't afford a lawyer. You're not paying. I am. Eliza shook her head. I won't let you do that. You don't get a choice. His voice hardened. I'm doing it anyway. Already sent him a telegram. He's coming down tomorrow to talk to you. Caleb, listen to me. He grabbed her hands, rough and desperate. I've lost enough in this life. Lost my wife to childbirth. Lost the baby with her. Lost years to grief and anger and just barely surviving. I'm not losing you too. Not to this. Not without exhausting every possible option. Eliza stared at their joined hands, his scars overlapping hers. Your wife, she said softly. I didn't know. Yeah, 5 years ago. I don't talk about it. He looked away. Shut down after that. Couldn't see the point of caring about anything. Then you showed up, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want something more than just making it through another day. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just don't give up. Not yet. The deputy's boots sounded in the corridor. Time's up. Caleb stood reluctantly. At the cell door, he paused, looking back. The men send their regards. Tommy especially. Kid's a mess without you. Tell him to keep practicing his letters. Tell him yourself when you get out of here. Caleb, when? He repeated firmly. Not if. He left before she could argue, and Eliza was alone again with the silence and the slowly moving square of light. The lawyer arrived the next afternoon. His name was Marcus Brennan, and he looked nothing like Eliza expected. Mid-50s, slight build, wire-rimmed spectacles, and a suit that had seen better days. He carried a battered leather case and the air of a man who'd seen every kind of trouble humanity could produce and wasn't impressed by any of it. Miss Hartwell, he said, settling into the chair the deputy had brought. Or do you prefer Hart? Either, both. Does it matter? Not particularly. I'm here to discuss your case, not your identity crisis. He pulled papers from his case, spreading them across the small table. I've reviewed the warrant and the charges, 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter stemming from a fire at Riverside School for Girls in Pennsylvania 3 years ago. You were a teacher there? Yes. And you fled before authorities could question you properly? Yes. Why? Eliza looked at him, really looked. His eyes were sharp behind those spectacles, but there was something else there too. Not judgment, just curiosity. Because I knew how it would go, she said. I was there. I smelled smoke and ran toward the building. Got 3 girls out before the structure collapsed. But there were 7 girls in total, and the town needed someone to blame. Were you blamed officially? Were there charges filed? Not before I left. But the whispers had started. People saw me near the building, assumed I'd been inside already, doing something. Setting the fire, I suppose. Did you? No. Brennan wrote something down. Tell me about the school. Who ran it? Who funded it? A woman named Mrs. Beatrice Coleman, widow of a railroad magnate. She founded the school to educate daughters of wealthy families. Very prestigious, very exclusive. And you taught there? Literature and composition. I was hired 2 years before the fire. Good at your job? I'd like to think so. The students liked you? Eliza felt her chest tighten. Some did. Others, their families didn't approve of my methods. I encouraged independent thinking, asked questions they considered inappropriate for young ladies. Such as? Whether they wanted the lives their parents had planned for them. Whether marriage and motherhood were the only paths worth pursuing. Whether women might be capable of more than decorative functions. Brennan's eyebrows rose. I imagine that went over well with wealthy parents. About as well as you'd expect. There were complaints. Mrs. Coleman defended me at first, but the pressure mounted. I think she was planning to let me go at the end of the term. So you had enemies. I had people who disagreed with me. I wouldn't call them enemies. Someone burned down a school and 7 girls died. I'd call that an enemy. Brennan tapped his pencil against his notes. Who benefits from the fire? I don't understand. Follow the money. The school was destroyed. Who collected insurance? Who profited? Eliza thought back, trying to remember details she'd tried to forget. Mrs. Coleman, I suppose. The school was her property. Was it profitable? I don't know. We were always fundraising, always asking for donations. Interesting. Brennan made another note. What about the land itself? Where was the school located? Edge of town, near the river. It was a beautiful property, old estate that had been converted. Prime real estate? I suppose so. Why does that matter? Because sometimes fires aren't about grudges or revenge. Sometimes they're about clearing the way for something more profitable. Brennan looked up. I need you to write down everything you remember about that night. Everyone you saw. Everything that seemed odd or out of place. Every detail, no matter how small. Mr. Brennan, I've had 3 years to think about this. If there was something useful to remember, I would have already You've had 3 years running and hiding. That's different from investigating. Now you're going to sit still and remember properly. He pushed paper and pencil across the table. Start writing. I'll be back tomorrow. He left her with the blank pages and the weight of the past pressing down. Eliza wrote until her hand cramped. Wrote about the evening before the fire, a faculty meeting where Mrs. Coleman had seemed distracted, worried about something she wouldn't discuss. Wrote about the fire itself, the smell of kerosene, which she'd noticed but hadn't thought significant at the time. Wrote about the aftermath, how quickly the school's board of trustees had dissolved, how Mrs. Coleman had left town within weeks, how the property had been sold almost immediately to a development company. She wrote about the 3 girls she'd saved. Mary Patterson, 12, daughter of a judge. Sarah Whitmore, 14, whose father owned textile mills. And little Anna Chen, 9, the daughter of the only Chinese family wealthy enough to afford the school's tuition. She wrote about the 4 she hadn't saved, and her hand shook so badly she had to stop. The next morning, Brennan returned with Caleb. They stood outside her cell, heads together, discussing something in low voices. Finally, the deputy let them both in. "Tell her," Brennan said to Caleb. Caleb looked uncomfortable. "I sent telegrams to Pennsylvania, asking about the girls you saved." Eliza's heart stopped. "Why would you do that?" "Because Brennan said we needed witnesses, people who could testify to what really happened. I haven't seen them in 3 years. They probably don't even remember." "They remember." Caleb handed her a telegram. "This came this morning." The paper trembled in her hands. The message was brief. "Miss Hartwell saved my life. Will testify. Mary Patterson." "There's more," Brennan said, pulling out 2 additional telegrams, both from the other girls she'd rescued, both willing to testify. "They'll come?" Eliza whispered. "They'll come," Caleb confirmed. "All 3 of them. Their families too, from what the telegrams suggest. But that doesn't prove I didn't start the fire." "No," Brennan agreed. "But it establishes character. Shows you were trying to save lives, not take them. And it gives us credibility when we start asking harder questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that follow the money." Brennan sat down, pulling out more papers. "I did some digging. The property where Riverside School stood was sold 6 weeks after the fire to Consolidated Land Development for a fraction of its actual value. Guess who's on Consolidated's board of directors?" Eliza shook her head. "Jonathan Coleman, Mrs. Beatrice Coleman's stepson. The man she'd been fighting in court for years over control of her late husband's estate." The pieces started clicking together in Eliza's mind. He wanted the property. More than that, he wanted to force his stepmother into a position where she'd have to sell. The school was losing money. I found the financial records. She was bleeding funds trying to keep it afloat, using her personal inheritance. If the school was destroyed, she'd have nothing left, would have to sell to pay debts. And her beloved stepson would be right there, ready to buy at pennies on the dollar. Caleb leaned forward. "You think he set the fire?" "I think it's worth investigating. The problem is proving it." Brennan looked at Eliza. "In your statement, you mentioned smelling kerosene. Where exactly?" "Near the east entrance, the service door that led to the dormitories." "And the fire started where?" "The dormitories, 2nd floor. Witnesses said you were seen near the building. Which entrance were you near?" "The main entrance. Front of the building. I was walking home from the library in town, saw smoke, and ran toward it." "So you approached from the opposite side of where the fire actually started?" "Yes." Brennan's eyes gleamed. "That's important. Very important. Because if you were approaching from the front and the fire started in the back, whoever saw you couldn't have seen you starting anything." "Unless they're lying," Caleb said quietly. "Unless they're lying," Brennan agreed. "Which brings us to the witnesses. Who saw you, Miss Hartwell? Who reported seeing you near the building?" Eliza thought back, her memory hazy with panic and smoke. "Mrs. Coleman mentioned a witness. I never knew who." "Then we find out. We find out who placed you at the scene, and we find out if they had any connection to Jonathan Coleman. That could take weeks, months." "We don't have months," Caleb said. "Trial's set for 3 weeks from now." Brennan stood, gathering his papers. "Then we work fast. I'll head to Pennsylvania tomorrow. Talk to everyone who was involved. Find the witness. Find the connection." "And if there isn't one?" Eliza asked. "If I really was just convenient? Just the scapegoat they needed?" Then we prove it anyway. Brennan's voice was firm. But I don't think you were convenient. I think you were deliberate. Someone needed you to be there, to be blamed, and I'm going to find out who. After they left, Eliza sat alone with hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that felt like it might crack her ribs if she breathed too hard. The days crawled past. Brennan left for Pennsylvania. Caleb visited daily, bringing news from the ranch. Tommy was teaching the other hands now, continuing the lessons in her absence. Jesse had started a lending library in the bunkhouse, using books donated from town. The mare's filly was growing strong and curious. Place isn't the same without you, Caleb said one afternoon. Men are trying, but what? It's just a ranch again, not a home. Eliza looked at her hands, scarred and rough from years of hard work. I made peace with the idea that I might not get out of this, you know. Don't talk like that. I'm serious. These past few days, sitting here, I've been thinking about what I'd want people to remember. If it all goes wrong. Eliza, let me finish. She met his eyes. I'd want them to remember that I tried, that I didn't just survive, I actually lived for a while. Taught those men. Made that house something more than wood and nails. Felt something real for once in my carefully controlled life. You're going to get out, Caleb said fiercely. Brennan will find what we need. Maybe. Or maybe he'll find that I really was just unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong everything. I don't believe that. You want to believe I'm innocent. That's different from knowing it. Caleb reached through the bars, took her hand. I know you. That's enough. 2 weeks passed. Brennan sent telegrams, cryptic messages about leads and dead ends, and promising developments. The 3 girls Eliza had saved arrived in Abilene with their families, taking rooms at the hotel. Mary Patterson, now 15, visited the jail with her father. She looked older than Eliza remembered. Taller, more composed. But when she saw Eliza through the bars, her eyes filled with tears. Miss Hartwell? Mary, look at you, all grown up. I'm so sorry. The words tumbled out. I should have said something sooner. Should have told them you saved us, that you didn't... Hush! You were a child. You couldn't have known what would happen. Mary's father, a stern-faced man with judge's eyes, stepped forward. Miss Hartwell, my daughter has told me what you did that night, how you came into the fire when everyone else was running away, how you got her out, then went back for the others. I only got 3 out. There were 7. You risked your life multiple times. Most people wouldn't have done that once. He paused, something like respect crossing his face. I'll be testifying at your trial. So will Sarah Whitmore's father and Anna Chen's family. We won't let this injustice stand. Thank you, Eliza managed, throat tight. After they left, she sat on her cot and let herself cry for the first time since her arrest. Not from fear or grief, but from the simple, overwhelming fact that someone believed her. Multiple someones. Maybe that would be enough. Brennan returned 3 days before the trial, looking exhausted and grimly satisfied. He brought Caleb with him, and they crowded into the small cell with papers spilling from Brennan's case. I found him, Brennan said without preamble. The witness who placed you at the scene, a man named Robert Hutchins. He was the night watchman at a warehouse near the school. I don't know that name. You wouldn't, but Jonathan Coleman knew him, employed him, in fact, through one of his shell companies. Hutchins was paid $500 the week after the fire. Eliza's breath caught. He lied. He testified in a preliminary hearing that he saw you entering the school's east entrance, the service door near the dormitories, around the time the fire started. His statement was enough to convince local authorities that you were a suspect. But I was never at the east entrance. I approached from the front. I know, because I found the real witness. A woman named Margaret Brennan, no relation, who was walking her dog that night. She saw you approach from the main road, saw you run toward the front entrance. She came forward at the time, but her testimony was ignored because Hutchins' version was more convenient. Why would they believe him over her? Because Jonathan Coleman's lawyers presented Hutchins as a credible professional witness. Margaret Brennan was a seamstress with no education and no standing. Classic dismissal of testimony based on class. Caleb's hand tightened on the cell bars. Can she testify now? She's already agreed to. She's been living with the guilt for 3 years, thinking her testimony didn't matter. She's ready to set the record straight. Brennan pulled out more papers. But there's more. I found the insurance investigator's report. It was buried in county records, marked as inconclusive, but it clearly states that accelerant was found in 3 locations, all on the east side of the building, all near the service entrance. Where I supposedly was, Eliza said. Where someone was, but not you. You were documented entering through the front by Margaret Brennan, which means whoever set those fires was working from inside the building or from the east side. Can you prove Jonathan Coleman was there? Not directly, but I can prove he had motive, means, and opportunity. And I can prove his paid witness lied. Combined with testimony from the girls you saved, from Margaret Brennan, and from the insurance report, we can create reasonable doubt. More than that, we can point the investigation in the right direction. Eliza felt dizzy. You think the charges will be dropped? I think we have a fighting chance. The prosecutor's case relies on witness testimony that we can now discredit. Without that, they have nothing but circumstantial evidence and your flight, which we can explain as self-preservation, not guilt. What about the girls who died? Eliza's voice broke. They still deserve justice. They do. And if this trial goes the way I think it will, the authorities will have to reopen the investigation. Look at Coleman. Look at who really profited from that fire. Caleb moved closer to the bars. When do we tell Fletcher all this? We don't. We save it for trial. Let the prosecution present their case, then we dismantle it piece by piece. Brennan's smile was sharp. I want them unprepared. Want them confident they've got an easy conviction. Then we pull the floor out from under them. That's a risk, Eliza said. Everything's a risk, but this gives us the best chance. Brennan started gathering his papers. The trial starts Monday, 3 days. Can you hold on that long? Eliza looked at Caleb, who looked back with something fierce and protective in his eyes. Yeah, she said. I can hold on. That night, alone in her cell, Eliza pulled out the journal Caleb had smuggled to her during one of his visits. She wrote by candlelight, her hand steady for the first time in weeks. 3 days until trial. 3 days until I face everything I've been running from. I should be terrified. Maybe I am. But mostly I feel something else. Ready. Ready to stop hiding. Ready to face the truth, whatever it costs. Brennan thinks we can win. Caleb knows we can. I'm not sure what I think. But I know this. Even if I lose, even if they find me guilty and lock me away forever, I won't regret staying, won't regret fighting. Because for 3 years I've been surviving. But these last few months, at the ranch, with the men, with Caleb, I was living, really living. And that's worth any price. Tomorrow they'll bring me to the courthouse, dress me in decent clothes for the jury, parade me in front of people who think they know what I am. Let them look. I know what I am. I'm a teacher, a survivor, a woman who ran into fire to save children she barely knew. And if that's not enough, then nothing will be. She closed the journal and lay down on the hard cot, listening to the sounds of the jail settling into night. Somewhere outside, the world was still turning. The ranch was still operating. Tommy was still practicing his letters, and Caleb was still fighting for her. 3 days, she thought. 3 days until everything changed. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. The courthouse in Abilene was a stone building that pretended to be grander than it was. 2 stories of weathered granite with columns that were supposed to suggest justice and permanence, but mostly just looked cold. Eliza arrived in chains, flanked by deputies, and felt every eye in town tracking her movement from the jail to the courthouse steps. A crowd had gathered. Some were curious onlookers, drawn by the spectacle of a murder trial in a town that usually dealt with cattle rustling and bar fights. Others were more purposeful. Eliza spotted the ranch hands clustered near the entrance, Tommy and Jesse and Miguel and the rest, wearing their Sunday clothes and looking uncomfortable but determined. Caleb stood with them, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Their eyes met briefly as she passed. He nodded once, and she felt steadier. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and older grudges. The gallery was packed, people crammed shoulder to shoulder on benches that groaned under the weight. Eliza was led to the defendant's table where Brennan waited, his worn suit brushed clean, his spectacles catching the light from the tall windows. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly as the deputies removed her chains. "I've been better. You'll be fine. Remember what we discussed. No outbursts, no reactions. Let me do the talking." What if they ask me questions I can't answer? Then you say you don't recall. Simple as that. He arranged his papers with practiced efficiency. The prosecutor is a man named William Thatcher. He's good, but he's lazy. Relies on witnesses doing his work for him. Once we discredit his star witness, his case falls apart. Eliza glanced back at the gallery. The 3 girls she'd saved sat in the front row with their families. Mary Patterson gave her a small, encouraging smile. Sarah Whitmore gripped her mother's hand. Little Anna Chen, not so little anymore, stared at her with an intensity that made Eliza's chest ache. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Everyone stood as Judge Harold Morrison entered, a gray-haired man in his 60s with the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed either time. He settled into his chair with a grunt. Be seated. We're here for the case of the State versus Elizabeth Hartwell, also known as Eliza Hart. 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter stemming from a fire at Riverside School for Girls in Pennsylvania. He looked over his spectacles at Eliza. How does the defendant plead? Brennan stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. So noted. Mr. Thatcher, you may proceed with opening statements. The prosecutor rose, a tall man with theatrical gestures and a voice that carried to the back of the room. He paced before the jury, 12 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Gentlemen of the jury, this is a simple case. A tragic case, but simple. 3 years ago, 7 young girls died in a fire at one of Pennsylvania's most prestigious schools. They died because someone set that fire deliberately. Someone who had access to the building. Someone who was seen near the location where the fire started. Someone who fled rather than face justice. He pointed at Eliza. That someone is Elizabeth Hartwell, a teacher at the school, a woman who harbored resentment toward the institution that employed her. A woman who was seen entering the building shortly before the fire broke out. A woman who ran rather than answer questions. A woman whose guilt is written in every choice she's made for 3 years. Thatcher paused, letting the words sink in. The prosecution will prove beyond reasonable doubt that Miss Hartwell set the fire that killed 7 innocent children. We will present witness testimony placing her at the scene. We will show she had opportunity and motive, and we will demonstrate that her flight proves consciousness of guilt. He returned to his table, looking satisfied. Brennan stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. Gentlemen, Mr. Thatcher is right about one thing. 7 girls died in that fire. 7 bright young lives cut short by someone's deliberate cruelty. That is a tragedy beyond measure. He walked toward the jury box. But the person responsible for those deaths is not sitting at the defendant's table. The person responsible orchestrated a crime, then orchestrated a cover-up, then orchestrated the persecution of an innocent woman to hide their guilt. Thatcher started to rise, then sat back down, clearly deciding to save his objections. The defense will show that Miss Hartwell was not near the location where the fire started. We will present witnesses who saw her approaching from the opposite side of the building. We will prove that the prosecution's star witness was paid to lie. And we will demonstrate that Miss Hartwell's flight was not consciousness of guilt, but rational fear of a justice system that had already decided her fate before hearing her side. Brennan returned to the table. By the end of this trial, you will know the truth. And the truth is that Elizabeth Hartwell is not a murderer. She's a hero who ran into flames to save children while others ran away. She deserves your verdict of not guilty. The 7 girls who died deserve the real investigation that finding her innocent will trigger. And justice, real justice, demands nothing less. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Thatcher, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Marshal Robert Fletcher. Fletcher took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd testified hundreds of times. He was sworn in, settled into the chair, and fixed his eyes on the jury. Thatcher approached. Marshal Fletcher, please tell the jury about your investigation into Miss Hartwell. I was assigned to locate Elizabeth Hartwell 3 months ago. She'd been a fugitive for approximately 3 years, wanted for questioning in connection with the Riverside School fire. And you found her where? Working as a housekeeper on the Boone Ranch outside of Abilene, Kansas, using the name Eliza Hart. Did she come willingly? After I presented a warrant for her arrest, yes. Did she deny being Elizabeth Hartwell? Fletcher paused. Not explicitly. She attempted to deflect questions about her identity and past. Why would an innocent person deflect such questions? Brennan stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Morrison said. Stick to facts, Mr. Thatcher. Thatcher nodded. Marshal Fletcher, in your professional opinion, does flight from justice indicate consciousness of guilt? Objection, Brennan said again. The Marshal's opinion on legal matters is irrelevant. Withdrawn. Thatcher smiled. No further questions. Brennan rose for cross-examination. Marshal Fletcher, when you arrested Miss Hartwell, did you find any evidence connecting her to the fire? Accelerants, tools, anything physical? No, but simple yes or no, please. No. Did you find any correspondence, journals, or documents suggesting she planned or committed arson? No. Did anyone at the Boone Ranch report suspicious behavior, criminal activity, anything suggesting Miss Hartwell was dangerous? Fletcher shifted. No, she was well regarded by the ranch hands and the owner. In fact, she was teaching several men to read and write, wasn't she? That's what I observed. Does that sound like the behavior of someone consumed by guilt and hiding from justice? People can hide in plain sight. Thank you, Marshal. No further questions. Fletcher left the stand looking annoyed. Thatcher called his next witness. The prosecution calls Robert Hutchins. A thin man in his 40s took the stand, nervous hands smoothing his jacket. He was sworn in and sat perched on the edge of the chair like he might bolt. Mr. Hutchins, where were you employed 3 years ago? I was a night watchman at Brenner Warehouse near Riverside School. And on the night of the fire, did you see anything unusual? Yes, sir. I saw a woman entering the school's east entrance around 9 o'clock. She was carrying something, looked like she was in a hurry. Can you identify that woman? Hutchins pointed at Eliza. That's her, I'm certain. How can you be certain? It was night 3 years ago. I saw her clear under the street lamp, dark hair, medium height, wearing a dark coat. Same face as the one sitting there. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. No further questions. Brennan stood and Eliza noticed his posture had changed, shoulders back, movements precise. He was ready for this. Mr. Hutchins, you testified you saw the defendant at 9 o'clock. Are you certain of the time? Yes, sir. I just checked my watch. And where exactly were you when you made this observation? At my post, by the warehouse entrance. How far is that from the school's east entrance? Maybe 200 yards? 200 yards. In the dark. And you could clearly see my client's face? The street lamp. There is no street lamp at the school's east entrance, Mr. Hutchins. The nearest lamp is on the main road, approximately 300 yards away. Hutchins' face went pale. I must have been mistaken about which lamp, or mistaken about the entire account. Brennan pulled a paper from his file. Mr. Hutchins, did you receive payment of $500 on March 15th, 3 years ago? That was yes or no? Yes. From whom? I don't recall. You don't recall who gave you $500? That's a substantial sum for a night watchman. It was a bonus from my employer. Your employer at the warehouse? No, I did some work on the side. For consolidated land development. Hutchins looked like he might be sick. A company owned in part by Jonathan Coleman, the stepson of Beatrice Coleman, who owned Riverside School. The same Jonathan Coleman who profited substantially when that school burned and the property was sold at a loss. Objection! Thatcher was on his feet. Counsel is making accusations without foundation. I'm establishing witness credibility, Your Honor, or lack thereof. Morrison leaned back. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Brennan. Brennan turned back to Hutchins. You were paid to testify against my client, weren't you? No, I saw what I saw. You saw what Jonathan Coleman paid you to say you saw. $500 to place an innocent woman at a crime scene she never approached. That's not... I wouldn't... You're a liar, Mr. Hutchins, a paid liar. And your testimony is worthless. Objection, Thatcher shouted. Counsel is badgering the witness. Withdrawn. Brennan returned to his table. No further questions. Hutchins practically ran from the stand. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Morrison banged his gavel. Order, we'll take a 15-minute recess. During the break, Eliza sat with Brennan while the gallery buzzed with conversation. That was necessary, Brennan said. Hutchins was their case. Without his testimony, they have nothing but circumstantial evidence. What about the other witnesses? Thatcher's scrambling. He wasn't expecting us to have documentation of the payment. He'll try to shore up his case, but we've planted doubt. Caleb appeared at the railing separating the gallery from the defense table. That was something. It's not over, Brennan warned. They'll come back harder. He was right. When court resumed, Thatcher called a series of witnesses, people who'd known Eliza at the school, who testified about her unconventional teaching methods and the complaints from wealthy parents. He painted a picture of a woman resentful of authority, radical in her views, capable of violence. Brennan objected when appropriate, but mostly let them talk. Eliza watched the jury's faces, trying to read their thoughts. Some looked skeptical. Others seemed convinced. One man in the back row kept glancing at the girl she'd saved, his expression thoughtful. Finally, Thatcher rested his case. The defense may call its first witness, Morrison said. Brennan stood. The defense calls Margaret Brennan. A woman in her 50s walked to the stand, plain dress, work-worn hands, but she held her head high. She was sworn in and settled into the chair with quiet dignity. Mrs. Brennan, where were you on the night of the fire at Riverside School? Walking my dog. I do that every evening, same route. And did you see anything unusual that night? I saw a woman running toward the school from the main road. She was moving fast, looked frightened. Can you identify that woman? Margaret pointed at Eliza. That's her. I'd know her anywhere. She ran right past me. Which direction was she coming from? The town library. She was on the main road, approaching the school's front entrance. Not the east entrance where the fire started? No, sir. Front entrance. Opposite side of the building entirely. Did you report this to authorities? Margaret's face tightened. I tried. Went to the sheriff's office the next day, but they said they already had a witness who saw her at the east entrance, and my testimony wasn't needed. Did they explain why your testimony wasn't needed? Not directly, but I got the sense they'd already decided what happened, didn't want complications. Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. Thatcher approached for cross-examination, but his heart wasn't in it. Margaret was unshakable, her account clear and consistent. He gave up after 5 minutes. The defense calls Mary Patterson. Mary took the stand with the poise of someone raised in privilege, but the nervousness of someone about to relive trauma. She gripped the rail with white knuckles. Miss Patterson, you were a student at Riverside School 3 years ago? Yes, sir. And you were in the building when the fire broke out? Yes, I was in the dormitory, second floor. I woke up to smoke. What happened next? Mary's voice shook. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The hallway was full of smoke. I tried to get to the stairs, but they were already on fire. I thought I was going to die. But you didn't. No, because Miss Hartwell came. She was coughing, could barely see, but she found me. Grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a window. Broke it with a chair and got me onto the roof of the first floor. Then she went back inside. She went back? For the others. I heard her calling their names, Sarah, Anna. She got them both out before the building collapsed. Brennan let that sit with the jury. Miss Patterson, in your opinion, is Miss Hartwell capable of deliberately harming children? No. Mary's voice was firm now. She risked her life to save us. If she hadn't been there, we all would have died. She's not a murderer. She's a hero. Thatcher declined to cross-examine. Sarah Whitmore gave similar testimony. So did Anna Chen, whose account was delivered in careful English, her Chinese accent lending weight to every word. By the time all three had testified, several jury members were wiping their eyes. The defense calls Caleb Boone. Caleb took the stand looking uncomfortable in his formal clothes. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Mr. Boone, you employed the defendant as a housekeeper? Yes, sir. For how long? 4 months, from November through February. And during that time, did you observe anything that suggested she was dangerous, unstable, capable of violence? No. Opposite, actually. Please explain. Caleb looked at the jury. Miss Hartwell. She's one of the most decent people I've ever met. She worked harder than anyone had a right to expect. She taught my ranch hands to read and write, men who'd been told their whole lives they were too stupid to learn. She stood up to bullies. She made my house a home again after years of it being just a building. Did she ever display violent tendencies? Never, not once. Did she seem like someone consumed by guilt? She seemed like someone trying to build a new life, like someone who'd been hurt and was doing her best to heal. Thank you, Mr. Boone. Thatcher stood for cross-examination. Mr. Boone, you're romantically involved with the defendant, aren't you? Caleb didn't flinch. I care about her, yes. So your testimony is biased. My testimony is honest. I've known liars and killers. She's neither. How can you be certain? Same way you're certain about anything that matters. You pay attention. You watch how people treat others when they think no one's looking. You see what they do when there's nothing in it for them. Caleb's voice hardened. Miss Hartwell taught reading to ranch hands for no pay, no recognition, no benefit to herself. She did it because she believed they deserved better. That's not the action of someone who'd kill children. Thatcher had no response to that. Finally, Brennan called Eliza to the stand. She walked forward on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat in the chair that was still warm from Caleb, and tried to remember how to breathe. Brennan approached gently. Miss Hartwell, please tell the jury what happened the night of the fire. Eliza looked at the 12 faces watching her, took a breath, began. I was walking home from the library. It was late, maybe 8:30. I'd been researching lesson plans for the next week. As I got closer to the school, I smelled smoke. What did you do? I ran toward it. The building was my responsibility. Those girls were my students. I couldn't just walk away. Where did you enter the building? Front entrance, the main doors. I could see smoke coming from the upper windows on the east side, so I knew that's where the fire was. Did you go to the east side? Not until I was inside. I went straight to the dormitories. The stairs were already burning, but I made it up. Found Mary first. Got her out through a window. Then went back for Sarah and Anna. Did you try to reach the other girls? Eliza's voice broke. I tried so hard, but the fire, it moved so fast, the ceiling collapsed. The stairs were gone. I couldn't. She stopped, unable to continue. Brennan waited, patient. Miss Hartwell, why did you leave town after the fire? Because I heard what people were saying, that I'd been seen entering the building before the fire started, that I was responsible. I knew how it looked. Young teacher, no family, no connections. I knew I'd be blamed whether I was guilty or not. Were you guilty? No. I tried to save those girls. I failed 4 of them, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But I didn't kill them. I didn't start that fire. Do you know who did? No. But someone wanted that school destroyed. Someone who stood to profit from its destruction. Thatcher shot to his feet. Objection. Speculation. Your Honor, Brennan said calmly, the defense has evidence suggesting financial motive for the arson. We request permission to present it. Morrison frowned. This is highly irregular. Mr. Thatcher, were you aware of this evidence? No, Your Honor. This is ambush. It's the truth, Brennan countered, and it's relevant to establishing my client's innocence. Morrison considered. I'll allow it, but keep it brief, Mr. Brennan. Brennan pulled documents from his case. These are financial records from Riverside School showing consistent losses over 2 years. These are insurance documents showing the property was insured for substantially more than its market value. And these are land sale records showing the property was sold to Consolidated Land Development for a fraction of the insurance payout. He handed them to the jury foreman. Consolidated Land Development is controlled by Jonathan Coleman, stepson of Beatrice Coleman, who owned the school. Jonathan Coleman had fought his stepmother in court for years over control of his father's estate. When the school burned, she was left with no assets and forced to sell the land at a loss. Jonathan Coleman was the primary beneficiary. The courtroom erupted. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in this court! When silence finally returned, Brennan continued. Miss Hartwell was a convenient scapegoat, a woman with no powerful connections who could be blamed while the real criminals profited. The prosecution's case relies on paid testimony from a man who works for the very company that benefited from the fire. That's not justice. That's conspiracy. Thatcher was on his feet, objecting to everything, but Morrison waved him down. Mr. Brennan, you're making serious accusations. I'm presenting evidence, Your Honor. Evidence the authorities in Pennsylvania apparently chose to ignore in their rush to blame an easy target. Morrison looked at the documents, then at the jury, then at Eliza. Mr. Thatcher, do you wish to cross-examine the defendant? Thatcher looked at his notes, at Eliza, at the jury's faces. He seemed to deflate. No, Your Honor. No questions. Eliza returned to the defense table on legs that barely held her. Brennan squeezed her hand briefly. Both sides gave closing arguments. Thatcher half-hearted, Brennan passionate. Then the jury was sent to deliberate. Eliza sat in a side room with Brennan, waiting. Minutes crawled past. An hour. 2. What's taking so long? She asked. It's only been 2 hours. Some juries deliberate for days. Do you think we won? I think we gave them reasonable doubt. Whether they choose to use it, he shrugged. Juries are unpredictable. Caleb appeared at the door. Any word? Not yet. He sat beside Eliza, took her hand. They waited together in silence. Finally, after 3 hours, the bailiff appeared. Jury's back. They filed into the courtroom. The gallery had remained packed, people unwilling to leave. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. Morrison took his seat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, the man who'd been watching the girls testify. We have, Your Honor. What say you? On all 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Eliza felt her knees give out. Caleb caught her, held her up as people cheered and shouted, and Morrison banged his gavel uselessly. Not guilty, she whispered. Not guilty. Brennan was grinning. Congratulations, Miss Hartwell. You're a free woman. The chaos continued for several minutes before Morrison restored order. Miss Hartwell, you are hereby released from custody. All charges are dismissed. Marshal Fletcher, I'm ordering a full investigation into the evidence presented here today. If Mr. Coleman is responsible for this fire, I want him brought to justice. Fletcher nodded grimly. Yes, Your Honor. Morrison banged his gavel one last time. Court is adjourned. Eliza was surrounded immediately, Mary and Sarah and Anna throwing their arms around her, crying and laughing. Tommy pushed through the crowd, Jesse and Miguel behind him. Caleb stood back, watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. Finally, the crowd thinned. Eliza found herself face to face with him. You did it, he said. We did it. You, Brennan, everyone. You did it. He pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. You stood there and told the truth, and you won. I'm free, she said, still not quite believing it. You're free. They stood together in the emptying courtroom, holding each other, while outside the Kansas sun set over a world that suddenly felt full of possibility. Freedom felt strange. Eliza stood on the courthouse steps in the late afternoon light, breathing air that tasted different than it had an hour ago. People streamed past, some offering congratulations, others simply staring. She barely registered them. The world had shifted on its axis, and she was still finding her balance. Caleb stood beside her, his hand warm against the small of her back. Not possessive, just there, steady. You need a minute, he asked. I need about 1,000 minutes, but I'll settle for getting out of here. They walked toward the wagon he'd brought from the ranch. Tommy was waiting there, holding the horse's reins, his face split in a grin so wide it looked painful. Miss Hart, we did it. You're free. We did it, she agreed, climbing into the wagon. Her legs were shaking, had been shaking since the verdict was read. Thank you for being here, Tommy. Wouldn't have been anywhere else. He handed the reins to Caleb and scrambled into the back. Jesse wanted to come too, but someone had to mind the ranch. He made me promise to tell you he's proud of you. Tell him I'm proud of him too, all of you. Caleb clicked his tongue and the horses started moving, pulling them away from the courthouse, away from the jail, away from the weight of 3 years of running. Eliza watched the buildings of Abilene pass by, trying to memorize what this moment felt like, the moment everything changed. What happens now? She asked quietly. Caleb glanced at her. What do you want to happen? I don't know. I haven't let myself think past the trial. Then start thinking now. You're free, really free. No more running, no more hiding. You can go anywhere, do anything. The words should have been liberating. Instead, they felt terrifying. She'd spent 3 years with one goal, survival. Now that she didn't have to just survive, she had no idea what came next. They rode in silence for a while, the ranch slowly appearing on the horizon. As they got closer, Eliza saw figures gathered in the yard. The hands had lined up like a welcoming committee, and as the wagon approached, they started cheering. "What is this?" she asked. "They wanted to celebrate," Caleb said. "Figured you earned it." Jesse stepped forward as they pulled to a stop, his weathered face creased with a genuine smile. "Welcome home, Miss Hart." Home. The word lodged in her chest like a stone. "Thank you, Jesse." Miguel had prepared food, simple fare, but enough to feed everyone. They gathered in the main house, cramming around the table and spilling into the front room, eating and talking and laughing. It felt like a party, except Eliza couldn't quite shake the sense that she was watching it all from outside herself. Tommy cornered her after supper, his expression serious. "Miss Hart, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What you said in court, about failing those 4 girls, about carrying that forever." He looked down at his hands. "Do you really think you failed them?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "I couldn't save them, Tommy. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach them in time. So yes, part of me will always feel like I failed." "But you tried. You ran into a burning building when everyone else was running away. You saved 3 lives. How is that failure?" "Because it wasn't enough." "Maybe enough is impossible," Tommy said quietly. "Maybe we're not supposed to save everyone. Maybe all we can do is try our best and live with whatever comes after." Eliza looked at this kid who'd been a barely literate ranch hand 6 months ago and was now offering her wisdom she desperately needed to hear. "When did you get so smart?" "Had a good teacher." He grinned and walked away before she could respond. The celebration wound down as darkness fell. The hands drifted back to the bunkhouse, leaving Eliza and Caleb alone in the kitchen with the debris of the meal scattered across the table. "You don't have to clean that tonight," Caleb said as she started gathering plates. "I need to do something with my hands or I'll lose my mind." "Then I'll help." They washed dishes in comfortable silence, the routine familiar and grounding. When the last plate was dried and put away, Eliza found herself standing at the window, staring out at the dark prairie. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. "Keep thinking this can't be real, that I'll wake up in that cell and find out it was all a dream." Caleb moved beside her. "It's real. You're here, you're free, and nobody can take that from you. What if I don't know how to be free anymore? What if I've been running so long I forgot how to just be?" "Then you learn again, same way you learned to survive." She turned to face him. "Why are you being so patient with me?" "Because I know what it's like to lose yourself, to spend years just going through the motions because you're too afraid to feel anything real." His hand came up, gentle against her cheek. "You brought me back from that. Let me return the favor." Eliza closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You walked into my house and refused to flinch. That was enough." She kissed him then, soft and tentative, and felt some of the tension in her chest finally start to ease. The next morning, Brennan arrived at the ranch with news. Eliza met him on the porch, coffee in hand, still not quite used to the fact that she could stand here freely without chains or guards. "Miss Hartwell." He tipped his hat. "I come bearing updates." "Good or bad?" "Depends on your perspective." He accepted the coffee Caleb offered and settled into one of the porch chairs. "Marshal Fletcher took your case back to Pennsylvania. Jonathan Coleman has been arrested and charged with 7 counts of murder, arson, insurance fraud, and conspiracy." Eliza felt her breath catch. "They arrested him yesterday morning. Turns out once they started digging, they found a trail of evidence Coleman thought he'd buried. Bank records showing payments to Hutchins, correspondence with the insurance company, even a letter to his stepmother basically gloating about forcing her to sell the property. Will it stick?" "Fletcher thinks so. Coleman's arrogant, kept records thinking he was too clever to get caught. Those records are going to hang him." Caleb leaned against the porch railing. "What about the school? Will they rebuild?" "The land's been seized as proceeds of a crime. There's talk of using it for a public school, something accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy." Brennan looked at Eliza over his spectacles. "They want you to help design it." "What?" "Your testimony impressed some people in Pennsylvania. The judge, some local officials who'd suspected Coleman but couldn't prove anything. They're asking if you'd consider returning to consult on the new school, maybe even run it." Eliza set down her coffee before she dropped it. "They want me to run a school? After everything?" After everything, you're a woman who ran into fire to save children, who taught literacy to anyone who wanted to learn regardless of their station, who survived 3 years of hell and came out still fighting for what's right. Brennan's smile was small but genuine. Yeah, they want you to run it. I don't know if I can go back there. No one's saying you have to decide now, but the offer stands whenever you're ready. After Brennan left, Eliza sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the horizon. Caleb found her there an hour later. You're thinking about it, he said. Not a question. It's everything I wanted once, before the fire, before the running. Teaching was my whole life. And now? Now I don't know if I can go back to who I was before. Caleb sat beside her. Then don't. Be who you are now. That's enough. What if who I am now doesn't fit anywhere? You fit here. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The men need you. This place needs you. I need you. That's not fair. You can't ask me to choose between you and it. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm telling you that whatever you decide, you've got a home here. Whether you're running a school in Pennsylvania or teaching ranch hands in Kansas or doing something else entirely, this is your home if you want it. Eliza looked at him, this hard man who'd learned to be soft, who'd opened his home and his heart to a stranger with secrets. You'd really be okay if I left? I'd hate it, but I'd understand. He took her hand. You've spent 3 years running from your past. Maybe going back isn't running away. Maybe it's facing the thing you've been afraid of and proving it doesn't own you anymore. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm terrified you'll get on that train and never come back. But I also know you deserve to make your own choice. For the first time in years, you can actually choose. Don't waste that. Over the next few weeks, Eliza tried to imagine different futures. She'd wake up some mornings thinking she'd return to Pennsylvania, rebuild what was destroyed, turn tragedy into something meaningful. Other mornings, she'd look at the ranch, at the men gathering for their evening lessons, at Caleb working in the barn, and couldn't imagine leaving. The decision paralyzed her. It was Mary Patterson who finally helped her see clearly. She'd stayed in Abilene an extra week, wanting to spend time with the woman who'd saved her life. They sat in the ranch kitchen one afternoon, drinking tea and talking about everything except the fire. Miss Hartwell, Mary said finally, can I tell you something? Of course. After the fire, I had nightmares for 2 years. Every night I'd wake up smelling smoke, feeling the heat. My parents sent me to doctors, tried everything. Nothing helped. I'm sorry. Don't be. Let me finish. Mary smiled. The nightmares stopped when I decided to become a teacher. Eliza looked up sharply. You're teaching? Starting next fall, at a girls' school in Boston. My parents fought me on it, said it wasn't appropriate for someone of my station. But I told them I learned from the best that education matters more than station. Mary, you saved my life that night, but you saved more than that. You showed me that a woman can be more than what society expects, can think for herself, fight for what she believes in, risk everything for what matters. Mary reached across the table, took Eliza's hand. So whatever you decide, Pennsylvania or Kansas or somewhere else entirely, just know that you changed lives. You're still changing them. That doesn't stop being true no matter where you are. After Mary left, Eliza sat with those words, turning them over in her mind. She'd been thinking about the decision as a choice between 2 different lives. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just about where she could do the most good. That evening, she found Caleb in the barn, checking on the mare and her growing filly. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. I've made a decision, she said. Okay. I'm going to Pennsylvania, going to help them build that school. She watched him absorb it, saw the flash of pain he tried to hide. When do you leave? 2 weeks, but Caleb, you don't have to explain. I understand. No, you don't. She moved closer. I'm going to Pennsylvania to build a school, a real school, open to any girl regardless of her family's wealth. A place where thinking is encouraged, where questions are welcomed, where young women can become whoever they want to be. That sounds perfect for you. It will be, for about 6 months. Then I'm coming back here. Caleb's head snapped up. What? I'm going to build 2 schools, Caleb. One in Pennsylvania for the girls who need it, and one here, on the frontier, for anyone who wants to learn. Children, adults, men, women. Everyone. Here? In Kansas? Right here. On this ranch. If you'll let me. She was talking faster now, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. We've got the space. We've got the need. These men you employ, the families in town, the children growing up thinking education is only for the wealthy. They all deserve better. And I can give it to them. Caleb was staring at her like she'd grown wings. You want to turn my ranch into a school? Part of it. Keep this cattle operation, keep everything running as it is, but add a schoolhouse, maybe start small, just a few students, build from there. That's ambitious. It's necessary. She grabbed his hands. You said I fit here. You were right, but I also fit in Pennsylvania, so I'm going to do both. Split my time, build something in the place that tried to destroy me, then come back and build something in the place that saved me. You're serious about this. Completely serious. I've spent 3 years just trying to survive. I'm done with that. I want to actually live, want to build something that matters, and I want to do it here with you, if you'll have me. Caleb pulled her into a kiss that felt like an answer and a promise, and the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Yes, he said when they finally broke apart. Yes to all of it. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Eliza wrote letters to Pennsylvania, outlining her vision for the new Riverside school. She sketched plans for a schoolhouse on the ranch, calculating costs and resources. She met with families in town, gauging interest in education for their children. The response was overwhelming. Parents who'd thought school was beyond their reach suddenly saw possibilities. Children who'd been working full-time began to imagine different futures. Even some of the wealthy families in Abilene expressed interest, tired of sending their children east for education. Tommy appointed himself her assistant, taking notes and asking questions and generally making himself useful. You're really coming back? He asked one evening as they reviewed plans. I'm really coming back. Promise? Promise. This is home, Tommy. Pennsylvania is just unfinished business. I'm going to keep learning while you're gone. All of us will. So when you come back, we'll be ready to help teach the younger kids. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. You'd do that? Miss Hart, you gave us something nobody else would. Now we get to pass it on. That's how this works, right? She hugged him, this kid who'd grown into a young man with purpose and dignity and hope. The night before she left, Caleb found her in her room, packing her few belongings into the same battered suitcase she'd arrived with. Seems wrong, he said from the doorway. You leaving with as little as you came with. I'm not leaving with as little. She gestured around the room. I'm taking all of this with me. The memories, the lessons, the people. You can't pack that in a suitcase. I'm going to miss you. 6 months, that's all. Then I'll be back for good. What if Pennsylvania changes your mind? What if you get there and realize that's where you belong? Eliza crossed to him, took his face in her hands. I belong where I can make a difference, where I can teach and learn and grow. That's Pennsylvania and it's Kansas. It's both. And I refuse to choose between them when I can have both. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. They spent that last night together, talking and planning, and occasionally just being quiet in each other's presence. When dawn came, Eliza was ready. The whole ranch turned out to see her off. Jesse and Miguel and all the hands she'd taught, standing in the yard with hats in hand and awkward goodbyes on their tongues. Tommy hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. 6 months, she reminded him. I'll hold you to that. Caleb drove her to the station in Abilene. They didn't talk much during the ride, but his hand stayed linked with hers the whole way. At the platform, she turned to face him one last time. Thank you, she said, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for giving me a home when I had nowhere else to go. Thank you for bringing my house back to life, for reminding me what it feels like to care about something. 6 months, she repeated. I'll be counting the days. She kissed him goodbye and climbed aboard the train, found a seat by the window and watched as Caleb stood on the platform, solid and sure, until the train pulled away and he disappeared from view. Pennsylvania was everything she remembered, and nothing like it. The town had changed, grown harder and more suspicious. But the land where Riverside School had stood was being transformed. Workers were already clearing debris, preparing to build something new. Eliza threw herself into the work. She met with architects and teachers and community leaders. designed classrooms that encouraged questions rather than silencing them, hired instructors who believed in education for its own sake, not as a tool to create obedient wives and daughters. She also tracked down the families of the 7 girls who died. Some didn't want to see her, still too raw with grief. Others welcomed her, thanked her for trying, forgave her for not being able to save everyone. The hardest visit was to the Coleman estate, now seized by the government. Mrs. Beatrice Coleman had moved to a small apartment in town, her wealth and status stripped away by her stepson's crimes. "Miss Hartwell," she said when Eliza appeared at her door, "I didn't expect to see you. I didn't expect to come back, but I needed to ask you something." "Ask." "Did you know about Jonathan, about the fire?" Beatrice was quiet for a long time. "I suspected. Not before. I would have stopped him if I'd known. But after, when things fell into place too conveniently, when he was so eager to buy the property, I wondered. But I didn't investigate, didn't ask questions. I let myself believe it was just misfortune." "Why?" "Because the alternative was admitting my husband's son was a murderer. And I was too proud, too weak to face that." She looked at Eliza with red-rimmed eyes. "I let you take the blame, rather than examine my own family. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I'm sorry anyway." Eliza felt the anger she'd carried for 3 years start to loosen its grip. "I forgive you." "Why would you do that?" "Because holding on to it doesn't change what happened, and because I'm tired of letting the past control my future." She left feeling lighter than she had in years. The months passed. The new Riverside School took shape, a beautiful building with large windows and open spaces, designed to let in light and possibility. Eliza hired teachers, developed curriculum, established scholarships for girls who couldn't afford tuition. And she wrote to Caleb, long letters about her work, her struggles, her triumphs. He wrote back with news from the ranch. The hands were continuing their lessons. They'd cleared space for the future schoolhouse. Everyone was waiting for her return. 6 months to the day after she left, Eliza boarded a train heading west. The ranch looked the same as she remembered, but also different. Better. The fences had been mended, the buildings painted, the yard cleared and organized. And there, next to the main house, stood the frame of a new building, small but sturdy, with large windows that would let in plenty of light. Caleb stood in the yard, and when he saw her climb down from the wagon, his face broke into a smile that made her heart stutter. "You came back." "I promised, didn't I?" He swept her into an embrace that felt like coming home. That evening, the whole ranch gathered for supper. The house was full of noise and laughter and the kind of chaotic warmth that only comes when people genuinely care about each other. After the meal, Tommy stood and cleared his throat. "Miss Hart, we got something for you." He handed her a wooden sign, beautifully carved and polished. It read, "Boone Ranch School, where everyone can learn." "Jesse made it," Tommy said. "We all helped design it. Figured once the building's done, we need a proper sign." Eliza couldn't speak around the lump in her throat, just held the sign and nodded and tried not to cry in front of everyone. Later, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse, she and Caleb sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "I want to marry you," Caleb said suddenly. Eliza turned to look at him. "What?" "I want to marry you. Not because it's expected or because it's proper, because I love you, because you make me want to be better than I was, because I can't imagine going through another day without knowing you're coming back to me." "Caleb, I know it's fast. I know we've got a lot to figure out. Your time between here and Pennsylvania, the school, everything, but I don't care. I want you as my wife. Want to build this life with you officially." Eliza felt joy surge through her chest. "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too. Have loved you probably since you first showed up at my cell and refused to let me give up." He kissed her then, long and thorough, and when they broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. They married a month later in a simple ceremony. No grand affair, just the ranch hands and some families from town gathered in front of the still unfinished schoolhouse. Tommy read a passage from one of the books Eliza had taught him with, his voice steady and proud. Jesse gave her away, his weathered face split in a rare smile. The vows were traditional, but when Eliza spoke them, she meant every word, through better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and health. She'd seen the worst already. Now she was ready for whatever came next. The school opened the following spring. Just 5 students at first, children of ranch hands and townspeople who'd never thought education was within reach. Eliza taught them herself, with help from Tommy and Jesse and some of the other hands who'd become literate enough to assist. Word spread. By summer, they had 12 students. By the next year, 25. Families traveled from neighboring ranches to enroll their children. Some adults came too, wanting to learn what they'd been denied as children. Eliza split her time between Kansas and Pennsylvania, spending spring and summer at the ranch school, fall and winter at the rebuilt Riverside. It was exhausting and exhilarating and exactly what she needed. Both schools thrived under her care, each feeding the other with ideas and innovations. 3 years after the trial, Marshal Fletcher sent a letter. Jonathan Coleman had been convicted of all charges and sentenced to life in prison. The case had sparked investigations into other suspicious fires, other wealthy men who'd profited from destruction. Real reform was happening, slowly but surely. Eliza read the letter on the porch of the ranch house, Caleb sitting beside her. Their first child, a daughter they'd named Hope, after the filly in the barn, played in the yard, her laughter bright and clear. "Justice," Caleb said quietly. "Finally." Eliza folded the letter carefully. Those 7 girls got justice, and their deaths meant something, changed things. Because you made sure they did. You could have run, could have stayed hidden. Instead, you fought. "We fought," she corrected. "All of us. You, Brennan, the girls who testified, everyone who refused to let the lie stand." Hope ran up to the porch, her small hands full of wildflowers. "Mama, look!" Eliza scooped her up, breathed in the scent of grass and sunshine and pure joy. This life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. This family, this home, this purpose. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." That evening, after Hope was asleep, Eliza stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse. It had grown over the years, 2 rooms now instead of 1, with plans to add a 3rd. The walls were covered with students' work, their growing understanding evident in every carefully formed letter. Tomorrow there would be lessons to teach and problems to solve, and the constant challenge of making education accessible to everyone who wanted it. There would be setbacks and struggles and moments when she questioned whether she was doing enough. But tonight, standing in this space she'd helped create, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She'd been tested by fire and emerged scarred, but stronger. Had run from her past and faced it and survived. Had found love in an unlikely place, built a home where she'd only sought shelter, created purpose from pain. The 7 girls who died in that fire would never be forgotten. Their names were carved on a memorial at both schools, a reminder that every life matters, every loss counts, every injustice demands to be addressed. But they were also honored by what came after, by the hundreds of students who passed through these schoolhouse doors, by the ranch hands who learned to read and write and saw themselves as more than society had told them they could be, by the girls who learned they could question and think and build their own futures, by a woman who refused to stay broken. Caleb found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how far we've come, how much we've built, how different everything is from when I first stepped off that wagon." "You stepped off that wagon looking like you'd fight the whole world if it gave you trouble." "I was terrified." "Maybe, but you didn't show it. Just set your jaw and got to work." Eliza turned in his arms, looked up at the man who'd given her shelter and found love instead. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger with secrets. Thank you for turning my ranch into a home." They stood together in the doorway, watching the stars emerge over the Kansas prairie. Inside the schoolhouse, knowledge waited to be shared. Inside the house, their daughter slept peacefully. And inside Eliza, the fear that had driven her for so long had finally quieted. She'd spent years running from fire. But fire, she'd learned, wasn't just about destruction. It was also about transformation. About burning away what was weak to reveal what was strong. About clearing the ground so new growth could emerge. She'd been tested, she'd survived, and she'd become something more than she'd ever imagined possible. Not perfect, not unmarked by her trials, but alive, free. And finally, truly home. The frontier was still brutal. The work was still hard. Justice was still slow and imperfect. But standing here with Caleb, With their daughter sleeping nearby and students' work covering the walls, and a future full of possibilities stretching ahead, Eliza knew one truth with absolute certainty. Courage and love and sheer stubborn determination could rewrite even the harshest story, could turn tragedy into triumph, could transform a woman running from her past into a woman building something that would outlast her. The past would always be there, marking her like scars, but it didn't define her anymore. She'd walked through fire and emerged on the other side, and she wasn't done burning yet.